Welcome, welcome, welcome. I would like to welcome you to episode 554 of the Unpopular Podcast. This is the man, the myth, the legend, Jalen Hunter. Here at the Unpopular Podcast. Now, if you ask you to agree with me, I'm asking you to hear me out. The reason why I believe it's important to take what we saw from the Miami Hurricanes and Ole Miss game, which in my opinion, was probably one of the best college football playoff games we've ever had, especially when you talk about the ending. The reason why I think it's so important to really look at that game is it tells a lot of stories. One of the stories that it tells is how important it is to continue with the season, how important it is to, even if there's a roadblock, even if something doesn't go the way that you think it should, you should continue onward. Do you remember everyone, including myself, was down on Miami when they lost? I think it was to Louisville. And it's like, yo, how is it that a team that was a preseason co-favorite to win a national championship, you had a 6 or 7 year player at the quarterback position in Carson Beck, who was a star player at Georgia. How is that team that had one of the most expensive defenses in football? How is that team losing to a team like Louisville? No offense to Louisville, but when you think of Louisville, you think of not Lamar Jackson, but also it's more of a basketball school. But to get to this point, after that, and people, you know, I do also think it's interesting that after that loss, they were behind Notre Dame majority of the year. You know, obviously they beat Notre Dame the first game, but they were behind Notre Dame in the rankings all year. So the fact of that was a controversy as to, is Notre Dame going to get in? Is Alabama going to get in? Is Miami going to get in? And now one of those teams, i.e., Miami, is making it to the national championship. It's just you have to continue with the season. I'm an Oregon fan. I know whew, it's gonna crush me, but I'm about to talk about the Oregon Ducks getting just demolished by Indiana. But me being an Oregon fan, I understand what it's like being a fan of a team that is coached by Mario Cristobal. Now, when he was at Oregon, Mario Cristobal had the reputation of being a good coach, but he could never win the big game. Or not only could he not win the big game, there would always be a game in the middle of the season that you're supposed to win that you just lose. Like you'd lose to a Stanford, you'd lose to an Oregon State, you'd lose to one of those type of schools. And when you looked at Mario Cristobal, the questions rain down. Okay, what is the ceiling for Mario Cristobal? What is the ceiling for a team coached by him? Now, a lot of people was open in saying that this was the perfect, I'll say, perfect pairing for Mario Cristobal, seeing as though he went to Miami. He's from Miami, I think. The whole family's there. But still, you can be a perfect pairing and still not work out. I think when you just look at this Miami team, it's incredible the fact of where they were at, not just in the beginning, but in the middle of the season. The fact that they are now a game away from winning a national championship, possibly, is incredible. I know Michael Irving gets all the attention, but this team is great. When you look at just this game, we're going to talk about Ole Miss in a second, but when you look at just the Fiesta Bowl, Obviously, I don't know if I said the score, but Miami beat Ole Miss 31 to 27, and it literally came down to the last drive of the game. Carson Beck was incredible. 23 for 37, 268 yards, two touchdowns. He did have an interception, but it is what it is. Mark Fletcher Jr. was incredible. 22 carries for 133 yards. Kellen Monroe, Marion, I'm sorry, was great. Seven receptions for 114 yards. Makai Tony was good. Five receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown. Everyone that you're expecting, everyone that you're hoping have a big game did. Your best running back was incredible. Remember how, I'm not going to say bad, but remember how stifled this running game was up against Texas A&M? Kellen Moore was incredible against Ohio State, but you're going up against an Ole Miss team. This is a whole nother animal. This is a whole nother game. I can't stress enough how improbable. Again, if you look at the beginning of the season, if you look at the um early projections, obviously you would think that Miami would be here. Again, Miami was there was a lot of people's favorites to win the national championship, to even make the national championship. But then you lose to, in fact, I'm gonna see. But then you lose to SMU. You lose to a Louisville. Teams that are considered inferior to you. And everyone, and I can admit that I was part of everyone, was out on the team. But even in this game, I do believe that there were some very questionable calls by the refs, but I don't think the refs is why you would say that Miami won this game. I think and this is why Carson I mean he's been there for 6 7 years. He was poised the entire time. Old Miss could not get a stop to save their life. But congratulations to Miami for winning the Fiesta Bowl and making it to the national championship. Now let's talk about Ole Miss for a second. Um, Ole Miss was not supposed to be here. I know I just said that about Miami, but no, Ole Miss was not supposed to be here. Your coach leaves literally at in the last game of the regular season. And we're not talking about just any coach. As much as you can hate Lane Kiffin, you can feel a type of way from Lane Kiffin, understandable. But one thing that is undeniable is Lane Kiffin is a good coach. Lane Kiffin turned this program around. Lane Kiffin is one of the main reasons why Ole Miss is a national champion, which is, I mean, national championship contender, which is why I do think it's funny. This is a little side note, little PS. I do think it's funny that that Lane Kiffin, when talking about um when talking about LSU, was saying that one of the main reasons why he went to LSU is because it affords him better players to build a championship roster, to hopefully build a program that can take you to a national championship. While the team that you're just leaving, Old Miss, where most of the team is transfers and recruits that you had, that you recruited, was a game away, was essentially a drive away, 4 points away from making a national championship. I just they the term is the grass isn't always greener, and I understand that, but it's like I know Lane Kiffin tweeted like I think he was heartbroken for Ole Miss, but trust and believe he was probably the happiest person that Ole Miss didn't make the national championship because how would that have looked for him? The team that you just left, the team that you left because you essentially said that they weren't good enough for you because it wasn't money. The reports are coming out saying that Ole Miss was and did match the money that LSU was offering you. So it wasn't money. And you even said that it was for competitive advantage. You have a better pool of players. If I'm Ole Miss and I heard that, I'm like, but you recruited me. So you're telling me that I'm not a national champion caliber player? And Lane, Cam Newton said it on 4th and 1. Shout out to him in his program. He was like, "Cam, it would look terrible on Lane Kiffin if Ole Miss were to go on and essentially win the national championship because it's like you couldn't do that with Lane Kiffin. It already looked bad that Lane Kiffin couldn't beat Georgia and the interim head coach did beat Georgia in the playoffs. Lane Kiffin has never really been able to outcoach Kirby Smart. Well, we saw it against in the playoffs with Ole Miss. So this is the very rare because I'm not for I don't believe in moral victories. I think you either win or you lose. There's obviously lessons in wins and there's lessons in losses, but what I will say is this. If I was Ole Miss, I would be proud because while when you had Lane Kiffin, people were saying that you're a national champion. I can't imagine what it's like to lose the voice of your team literally before the most important run of your life. It was a classic. I will say that. It was a classic. And that was one of the best college football playoff games we've ever seen. Shout out to Miami again for and I didn't realize until, watching the game, Miami hasn't competed for a national championship or hasn't won a national championship since what, 2001? So this is 25 years in the making. Congratulations for Miami for beating Ole Miss 31-27. Definitely well deserved. And this will go down as one of the best games, at least so far in the college football playoff era. So we're going to go from one of the best games in the college football playoff era to one of the worst games in the college football playoff era. And that is the Oregon Ducks lost to the Indiana Hoosiers 56-22. I know I'm an Oregon fan, so I'm sure that you feel my energy going down, and the weight of my shoulders is getting heavier because I don't feel like talking about this, but I have to. If you don't listen to anything I say, if you don't believe anything I say, if you don't trust anything I say, one thing that has been common theme on this podcast is momentum. And I talk about how important momentum is, not just, for multiple games, but for in game momentum. Whether you talk about, a quarter, whether you talk about a drive, whether you talk about the fans and being at home, momentum is one of the most powerful tools a team can have in a game. Once you have momentum, not saying you're always necessarily going to win, but it gives you an advantage. And the one thing that you cannot do is give a great team momentum because the thing about great teams is they know how to capitalize when they have momentum. You see, you see, you're going to look at the game and you're going to look at the final score and it says 56 to 22. And you're going to think to yourself, if you didn't watch the game, that damn, Oregon just got blown out the water. And this is going to sound crazy. But let me hold your hand. Let me let me help you. This is going to sound crazy, but the game was a lot closer than that score. I'm not saying that Oregon would or should have won, but the game was a lot closer to 56 to 22. This game was lost in the second quarter. And the game was lost in the second quarter because a team that already had momentum in Miami used the mistakes that Oregon had, that Oregon did, and as a smart team would, as a smart team should, capitalized on it. Oregon started this game. The first drive of the game was a pick six. And then Oregon scores, and then Indiana scores. So going into the second quarter, the score was 14 to 7. In that second quarter, I'm going to go drive by drive what happened just in that quarter. Mind you, the game is 14 to 7 Indiana. The start of the second quarter, you have punt Oregon, punt Indiana, a fumble by Oregon, a touchdown by Indiana, a punt by Oregon, a touchdown by Indiana, a fumble by Oregon, a touchdown by Indiana, and a missed field goal. So going into halftime, you go from being down 7 to 14 to 35 to 7 because you fumbled the ball twice. And every time you punted the ball, it gave Indiana good field position. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Indiana. Indiana is an incredible team. Indiana deserves to be playing for the national championship. I even said that last episode. While I had faith in my team, Oregon, I said we're probably looking at this year's national championship or this year's national champion in Indiana. But the last thing that you can do is give a good team momentum. Man, shout out to Kurt Siganelli, man. He has this. They showed a graphic, and it blew my mind. Two graphics blew my mind. In the two games, in these two games that Indiana played, right? The game against Alabama and this game against Oregon. Did you know that Fernando Mendoza only incompleted, I think, 5 passes or six, 5 or 6 passes? That was the one stat that was like, damn. And the other stat was this Indiana team, head to head, like when you look at comparison to comparison, they're almost identical to the 2019 LSU team. The LSU team that had, you know, Joe Burrow, that had Jamar Chase, that had Justin Jefferson, that had what Clyde Edwards-Helaire, that had Thaddeus Moss. That team, I think Patrick Quinn was on that team. This Indiana team statistically is neck and neck with that 2019 LSU team. I'm going to continue to talk about Indiana in a second, but I want to address something that Ryan Clark said because Ryan Clark, I believe he tweeted it, was questioning Dan Lanning, was questioning the validity of why so many people harp and heap so much praise on Dan Lanning as being the Oregon coach. Yet and still, this is the second year in a row that Oregon was, remember last year, they were the number one overall seed and they got blasted by Ohio State in the college football playoff. I think it was the second game, quarterfinals, Rose Bowl. And this year, the final score was 56-22. My response to that is two things can be very true. I understand the criticism because as a fan, I have questions as well. Like my question is, yo, why is it that it's not like I can say that the score was much closer, 56-22. I can say that it was closer than a 34 point game. But the final score is the final score. So why is it that Oregon continues to lose these type of games? Which is essentially what RC said. How is it that Dan Lanning, it is clear, it is clear that Dan Lanning has transformed this program because Oregon has always been a program that has been centered around offense. When you talk about Chip Kelly, when you talk about what Mark Elfridge, like program has always been centered around offense, and the stigma, and it's not really a stigma because that's what it's been, is it's a offensive program but soft defensively. And when you go up against an SEC team or when you go up against a physical team, they wart under pressure. But you can see with Dan Lanning, who is starting from the defense out, that this team just looks better. However, I do agree with RC in a sense of why is it that the two biggest games of Dan Lanning's coaching tenured, Oregon has been destroyed? How is this the same Oregon that we saw destroy essentially JMU and Texas Tech? Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that Texas Tech is on a different level or a lesser level than Indiana. I understand that, but there should not be, especially when you talk about recruiting, especially when you talk about the transfer portal. There shouldn't be a 34 point gap between Oregon and Indiana. And I'm not just putting this on Dan Lanning, but this is the second game because it just happened last year against Ohio State. This is the second time where it felt like either the team wasn't prepared or the team made a mistake and they couldn't get right. I feel that second quarter, it was just the second quarter was just mistake after mistake after mistake. And you saw that with Dylan Gabriel as the quarterback last year. Mistake, stall drive after stall drive. That's one side. But the other side, I will say, Dan Lanning has been the head coach of Oregon for what, 4 years now? And one thing that I will say is it is clear that he is building a program, and it is clear that this Oregon looks much different, even though it's hard to say that now as they're going home after losing by 34 to Indiana. This team looks much different than it did just 4 or 5 years ago. And obviously it's tougher as a college football head coach when you have the transfer portal and you have NIL and you have, kids going off and taking the biggest bag more than, staying at school. I know it's difficult, but it is clear that this team looks much different than it did before Dan Lanning. So while yes, I would love, I've watched Oregon constantly be at the doorstep and never be able to walk in. I saw them lose two national championships. I saw them lose against Ohio State. I saw them lose against Cam Newton and Auburn. I've seen them multiple times a game right before making the national championship and lose. I've seen them as a one seed several times and lose. I would love to see a national championship more than anybody as an Oregon fan. However, I understand that and I hope that it takes time and I hope that there's a payoff. But there are some questions. So shout out to RC for saying it. There are some questions as to Dan. Why is it that this is the second year in a row where it didn't even look like you didn't really compete? Again, I know that second quarter blew the game open, but it still happened. Why is it that Dante Moore, like Dylan Gabriel, were once Heisman candidates in the season? How did they have their worst game in the most important game possible? How is it that Oregon has a top tier defense? They've always had a top tier defense as Dan under Dan Lanning, I should say. Now, why is it that the two worst defensive performances that Oregon has had was in this year's playoffs and last year's playoffs? Something you got to question, man. But I say it once, or I said it once, and I'll say it again. Bruh, Fernando Mendoza. For people that don't understand, because the when you look at the box score, it doesn't make sense. Oregon, if you just look at the box score, Oregon was the more dominant team. Yes, Indiana rushed what 185 yards to Oregon's 93, but Indiana or Oregon had 285 receiving yards to Indiana's 177. But to answer that, most you had a defensive score, and most of their drives they were already in scoring territory. Again, you had fumbles, and you had missed or blocked field goal or not blocked field goals, blocked punts. The offense doesn't have to do much. Fernando Mendoza went 17 for 20 for 177 yards and five touchdowns, and they rushed for another two. They didn't have to do much. We're looking at I would be shocked at this point. The way that they beat Alabama, the way that they and that's I think that's the best compliment that I can say about Indiana right now. They can beat you a myriad of ways. Fernando Mendoza can go off. Elijah Surratt, the running back, he can be great. No, that's not. I'm sorry. Kellen Black. I apologize. He can be great. This is a physical team. Defensively, they can go at you. Kurt Kurt Siganelli, he's by far the best coach in college football right now. The Indiana Hoosiers, that which I didn't know until they said it on the broadcast, had the worst record in college football history before Kurt Siganelli got there. They're now a game away from they're now a game away from the team's first football national championship. So congratulations, uh, Indiana, for beating Oregon 56-22 and making it to the national championship. The national championship's on the 19th, so I have some time. I'll give my predictions further on down the line, but I don't think you guys. I'll try to make it a longer segment, but there should be no secret who I think is going to win the national championship at this point. But we'll see. Um, let's move over to NFL, and I'm gonna give my predictions for all the games. We're in the playoffs. This is the wild card, and a lot has been talked about by the coaches that have been fired from teams that aren't even in the playoffs, and this is going to be a very interesting playoff. We'll discuss each one, but let's first start with the Saturday games. Let's first start with Louisiana, Los Angeles at Carolina, because that in and of itself is a conversation. That in and of itself is a talking point that I wanted to address here. The conversation and the question is, how is it that a team that went 12-5 is playing on the road against a team that went 8-9? How is it that the Rams, that very possibly have this year's MVP and offensive player of the year, going to play away, going to be playing against the Carolina, going to play in Carolina after Carolina finished with a losing record? My answer is simple. If you want to change that rule, if you want to change reseed, cool. But what you're then saying is, or I'll say, what you're doing is taking away the importance of conference championship or conference wins. Because why would anybody care about winning a conference if you get no reward for winning that conference? If they did what a lot of people are saying, um, if they did what a lot of people saying and reseeded, right? We would never have got Quake Mo, the Beast, Marshawn Lynch run against the New Orleans Saints. We never would have got that. Was it the Saints? It might have been the Saints. Yeah. You have to, it's, there has to be some type of incentive. There has to be some type of award for doing something that four other teams or three other teams couldn't do, and that is win your conference. Now, if you want to go to this game, I know that Carolina upset Los Angeles a couple weeks ago in the regular season. And that's also the game where Los Angeles went to Carolina and Carolina won. However, we're talking about the playoffs. We're talking about Matthew Stafford. We're talking about Puka Nakua. We're talking about, Kyron Williams. We're talking about Jared Verse. We're talking about Sean McVay. I will say I'm not going to give Carolina no shot. You're at home. We just talked about momentum, albeit college football, but we talked about momentum when we talked about Indiana and Oregon. What I feel is going to need to happen for Carolina to win is they they need to look at the not only the game that they actually won, but they need to look at the Rams Falcons game. Yes, there was I think Matthew Stafford threw three picks or something like that. But the reason why they lost is because the run game. Bijan Robinson went ballistic against the Rams in that run. Now the run defense is good, but it wasn't the good that day. If Rico Dow is able to, I'm not going to say mimic what Bijan Robinson did, but if he's able to have a solid game, you have a shot. I The last thing you want to do is make it so that Bryce Young has to be the reason why you win or lose. I'm not saying that you can't depend on him. But if it's shown that Bryce Young isn't that type of quarterback at this point to be consistent enough to depend on to win a game like this. So you're gonna have to trust in the defense that was really good the first time they played the Rams, and you're going to have to trust the running game. I don't know if you're going to be able to do that. On top of the fact of, and they're getting Devonte Smith back or Devonte Adams back. I got the Rams. I think the Rams might destroy the Panthers. I could be wrong, but I just feel the way that the Rams know what this is. The Rams know that, and we're going to talk about another team a little bit later, but the Rams know that this, especially in the NFC, is wide open. And in the AFC, if they do essentially make it to the Super Bowl, you don't have Lamar Jackson, you don't have Patrick Mahomes, you don't have uh Joe Burrow. You may possibly only have to worry about Josh Allen. I think the Rams and Matthew Stafford understand that, and I think the first victim is going to be the Carolina Panthers. Then you have the Green Bay Packers at Chicago Bears. Now, this game is a little difficult for me to predict because there's some high highs with both teams and there's some low lows with both teams. I know the Green Bay Packers are getting back Jordan Love, but we've seen now obviously a lot of people, most people hang their hat on the Jordan Love game going up against the Cowboys. How we went into Jerry World and they beat the Cowboys in the playoffs. However, it's like they don't really give credit to the fact of Jordan Love has been sporadic to say to be polite. I don't know if Jordan Love can be depended on in these type of situations, which is why you're really going to need a big game from um, Josh Jacobs. However, you are going up against one of the worst Steve. I know that they have a bunch of takeaways, and that's going to mask the fact of this Chicago Bears defense is not good. Like it's not really good at all. It's just they have takeaway. They have a lot of takeaways. That's one of the most what's the word? That's one of the most misleading stats because they have a lot of takeaways, you would assume that the Chicago Bears defense is good. It is not. And you're also talking about an offense that while Ben Johnson has schemed up this offense perfectly a lot of times, it's also sporadic with Caleb Williams um at the helm, with Caleb Williams running the offense. I think they needed a comeback to beat the Green Bay Packers last time they played. Mm. I'm gonna go with the Chicago Bears only because they're at home and because obviously Michael Parsons is not there. So Michael Parsons, they don't really have a record to prevent the Chicago Bears offense from doing what they want to do. Then again, it did take a late game bomb to DJ Moore to win that game. I'm gonna stick with I'm gonna stick with the Chicago Bears. I don't think they're Super Bowl caliber in any way, shape, or form, but I do think that they're good enough to beat the Green Bay Packers because man, now I'm saying it out loud. I really don't trust neither. I don't trust Caleb Williams, nor do I trust Jordan Love. Mm. You know what? Mm. I changed my mind. I'm changing my mind right here. I'm picking the Green Bay Packers because I'm thinking the Chicago Bears defense, even though they are in Soldier Field, Chicago Bears defense is not good. Um, and Jordan Love, I don't even think either he didn't play or he got hurt last game, so I know he didn't finish the game. I'm gonna go with the Green Bay Packers. There you go. Then you have Sunday. You ready for this? I know, and what's hilarious about this, the first game that we're talking about is the Bills at Jacksonville. What's funny about this is we just talked about it with Matthew Stafford and the Rams, but this pertains to Josh Allen more than anybody. The the, the top four, three of the top four quarterbacks that most people would consider top quarterbacks in the league are not in the playoffs. You don't have to worry about Lamar Jackson. You don't have to worry about Josh or Patrick Mahomes. You don't have to worry about Joe Burrow. This has to be Josh Allen's year. Josh Allen has to be able to go on a run, right? Because we consider him, I mean, he was an MVP last year. We consider him a top tier quarterback. We consider him one of the top four best quarterbacks. And in a lot of people's eyes, he is the best quarterback in the league. And it's very interesting because what happens if he loses? What happens if you go into Jacksonville, which is arguably one of the hottest teams in football right now, especially when you talk about Trevor Lawrence? He's probably the hottest quarterback in the league right now. What happens if they go into Jacksonville and lose? I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Don't get me wrong, bro. I think Josh Allen is good. I think Josh Allen is great. I think he's an exceptional quarterback. I think he's a future Hall of Famer. But one thing that I've said this year is I think you have to lean on the run game, rushing game, which you have the rushing leader in James Cook. But this Jacksonville defense is playing phenomenal. I think they have the most, I think they're the highest scoring defense in the league. And then on top of that, Trevor Lawrence. My thing is this. I don't know. I know that what they're going to need to do is they're going to need to control the time of possession because the last thing that you want is Buffalo's defense to have to dictate this game because it's their defense is not that good, especially when you talk about the run defense. Travis Etienne might have the game of his life because while they have, boy, I think the fact of I know Trevor Lawrence, he hasn't won a playoff game in my I think since they came back against Justin Herbert and the Chargers all them years ago. I think Trevor Lawrence right now is playing the best football of his life. And the fact of you don't really have a dependable number one receiver. You don't really have a great, again, stats don't tell it all. You don't really have a great defense, which is why a lot of people say, "Oh, Josh Allen did it himself." This that, and the third. I think Jacksonville is going to win this game. Which brings me to the second upset that I believe is going to happen. Actually, San Francisco is going into Philly, and hmm, Philly, especially when you talk about their offense, has been off kilter. And I think that I don't. San Francisco is a great team. It's just at some point because when I wrote this down, when I broke it down, I said that San Francisco was going to upset Philly because I don't like how Philly's offense has been running. I don't like what how they've used Saquon Barkley most of this year. I don't like how they use AJ Brown most of this year. And I said if there's been multiple times where you've had to force uh, Jalen Hurts to beat you, and there have been times when he's been able to do it, but there's been times this year where he hasn't. And I said San Francisco, especially Brock Purdy, he's playing exceptional, and you have George Kittle, you have Christian McCaffrey. While most of the team is injured, you still have those three, and they've been slicing and dicing. But just as much as I changed my pick now I think Green Bay is going to beat Chicago. At some point, all these injuries has to come back and bite San Francisco. At some point, all these injuries is going to have to play a pivotal role in either advancing or not advancing for this San Francisco 49ers. And I think that is going to be this game. Because as much as we talked about the offense, San Francisco, or as much as we talked about the Philadelphia's offense kind of being, iffy, more so because of their offensive coordinator, their defense is phenomenal. Their defense is, yeah, they have a defense for sure. And as good as Christian McCaffrey, not as good as Brock Purdy's been playing, I don't know if he's going to be able to put the team on his back along with Christian McCaffrey, along with George Kittle. I don't know if they're going to be able to put that defense on their back. I know that reports are saying that Fred Warner may return. Who I don't think so. I'm going to go with Philly. I just think, and Philly's at home. I'm going to go with Philly. Now you have Los Angeles Chargers at New England. Here's my thing about both teams. We're talking about a team in New England that I think the stat is they've had this was the weakest schedule that a team has had in the last like 20, 30 years. This schedule was extremely weak. Now, you play who's on the schedule. They were able to win. They were able to do what they had to do, but still, it was a weak schedule. But even in that, Mike Vrabel has emerged as one of the top coaches in the league. Drake May is an MVP candidate. MVP front runner is either going to be him or Matthew Stafford. The running game has improved. Ramondre Stevenson, he hasn't fumbled the ball in a while. Travion Henderson's been great. Stephon Diggs has been, even though he has a lot of stuff going on off the field, he's been great as a vet for this team. Hunter Henry is still one of the top tier receiving tight ends, and this defense has been phenomenal. Christian Gonzalez and this defense, Barmore, it's is great. However, I don't know if you noticed, even with that easy schedule, right? New England has been down a lot in these games. Sort of like um sort of like the Broncos. New England, they've been down a lot and ultimately came back and won those games, but they've been down. to some teams that they shouldn't have been down to. However, to be fair, they won those games. And then you look at the Chargers. Justin Herbert is still seeking his first playoff win. He's going to try to seek that with one of the best defenses in football. However, due to injury, he also has one of the worst offensive lines in football. When you lose Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater, that's a huge blow. I think that in order for the Chargers to win, Justin Herbert is going to have to be Superman. Justin Herbert is going to have to go up against a vaunted defense and ultimately be Superman. And I don't think he can do it. I don't, with this defense on top of that, the Quentin Johnston uh, hype train has kind of gone down. He's come back to earth. Lad McConkey, now I think about it, I don't remember hearing his name once this year. Keenan Allen, he broke. I think he has the most receiving or receptions in Chargers history, but I don't know if that's going to, you know. Hmm. I'm gonna go with New England. I just think New England, they're playing better, and I think that they're the healthier team, and they're playing at home. They're the healthier team. I think Justin Herbert has the chance to do that, but he also has a chance because of how good this defense is and how his offensive line is not that good. He has a chance to have a repeat situation of last year against the Texans. So I'm going to go with New England to beat the Chargers. Then you have Monday Night Football. You have Houston at Pittsburgh. Um, I think a lot of confidence that Pittsburgh has is the fact that when they're in the playoffs, two, they beat Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, and three, they have the best quarterback they've had in a while, and Aaron Rodgers, even though he's 41 years old. Uh, and albeit their defense is playing well. T.J. Watt came back. He's playing well. Patrick Queen, Highsmith's playing well. Um, Jalen Ramsey's playing well. This arguably is the best team that Pittsburgh has had in a while. Um, well, what would be Pittsburgh's luck, or how lucky could Pittsburgh be with? While yes, they're at home, you're going up against C.J. Stroud and arguably the best defense that's playing in the wild card, and possibly the best defense in the league in Houston. Mm. I will say this though. Um, One thing that was underrated by this Pittsburgh team, and one of the reasons why they won against the Ravens, is they controlled the time of possession. They didn't allow the Ravens offense to really catch momentum until that fourth quarter. And at that point, it is what it is. If they're able to control, if Aaron Rodgers is able to be masterful, if Aaron Rodgers is able to break down this defense, which we've seen him do. Now, don't get me wrong, the Houston Texans defense is not the Baltimore Ravens defense. Um, then Pittsburgh has a chance. And you get DK Metcalf, your best wide receiver. Kenneth Gainwell's been great. Calvin Austin's been good. Jalen Warren has been great. I could see a win. However, I think that Houston is one of the hotter teams in football right now, and you're going up against arguably the best defense in football. Most assuredly, one of the best secondaries in football. You talk about Lassiter and Stingley, it's gonna be tough. I'm gonna go with Houston, which then will bring on a lot more different. Shout out to the NFL for doing a Monday game, allowing giving Pittsburgh some time to rest after the Monday night football game or some Monday night football game against or was it Sunday night? Sunday night football game, I'm sorry, against the Ravens. But I think that Houston is gonna win this game. I think while the Houston's offense isn't the same as Ravens offense, this defense is not the same as the Ravens defense either. So I have to go to recap. I have the Rams beating Carolina. I have Green Bay beating Chicago. I have Jacksonville beating Buffalo. I have the sick whoa the Eagles beating the 49ers. I have New England beating the Chargers, and I have Houston beating Pittsburgh. We will see, and obviously we'll talk about it next episode. So, um, I talked about this very briefly last episode, but it has been confirmed that Trae Young has been traded to Washington from Atlanta. And everyone knows, as someone that is from the DMV, I grew up essentially 20 minutes, 25 minutes away from it was, Verizon Center. Now it's the Capital One Arena. I grew up a die-hard Wizards fan. I have a Wizards tattoo on me. I'm, my thing is this. While I'm happy for the city that we got a premier point guard, um, my question is, does the I know they're saying that there's a good possibility that they might sit him out for the rest of the year so that he can we can compete for a top tier draft pick. Uh but I guess this is a tick. He's a seat filler and he's a star. So all we had to give we gave up. CJ McCollum's expiring. We gave up Corey Kispert. We didn't have to give him any draft picks or anything, which should tell you the market that Trae Young warranted. But um, yeah, I'm happy, and I think that he's going to be a fun watch. Him along with Alex Sarr, along with Sabali, along with uh, this young team. I think we have a shot to be really good and better than we are. I'm not gonna say really good. We have a shot to be better than we are. You know, um, Bud Carrington playing alongside someone that is willing to pass the ball, and Keyshawn George, Trey Johnson. Yeah, I feel like we're going to be interesting. If Trae Young is the able to be the leader, the vet that he could be, we'll see. But we haven't seen that in Atlanta. Maybe who knows. But for the Trae Young aspect, I think that this shows you what he cares about. And it kind of feels like Trey. I know that you're talking about a first start, and Washington was his preferred destination. I think he just said that to make it sound better. But when you see what Washington had to give up to get him, I it's hard for me to say that anybody else was really. Even though I do think that Trae Young would have been great for someone like Houston, that after losing Fred VanVleet, they don't really have a point guard, or someone like Milwaukee, or someone like who's someone that needs a point? The Timberwolves. I think that he would be great there, even though his deficiencies are major. You know, he doesn't play any defense. And I talked about it last episode. It doesn't seem like any teammate really likes him or really enjoys him as a teammate. But the fact that Washington was your preferred thing, and Washington only had to give up an expiring and Corey Kispert, who was, I think, at the time, our longest tenured player, uh, tells me that the market wasn't really solid for Trae Young. And also, it also isn't lost on me, and that's something that I'm wrestling with. It isn't lost on me that Washington is one of the only teams that can afford to give Trae Young the max that he's looking for. It's not lost on me that Washington is going to have a lot of cap space, and a lot of that can go to Trae Young. And it's also not lost on me that as soon as they traded Trae Young, I think that came out that Washington said that they're not going to discuss a contract extension until season's end with Trae Young. Right now, with this current contract, Trae Young's under contract for 2 years, or for this year and next year. Um, and as a Wizards fan, even though, yeah, I know we haven't really had a star since, Bradley Beal and John Wall, I don't know how I feel about giving Trae Young $300 million and he don't play no defense. I know they always talk about, well, Trae Young, he led a inferior roster to the Eastern Conference Finals. Did you look at the team that he went through? Did you look at the teams that he went through? And on top of that, how long ago was that? And on top of that, what has happened since then? A bunch of play-ins, a bunch of first round exits, um, a bunch of, getting kicked off or getting snubbed for the All NBA teams, getting snubbed off Team USA. Like, there's been a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily shine Trae Young in the brightest of lights. So while I guess I'm happy that as a fan that we have a star and we have the perfect, because he's not afraid to pass the ball. He led the league in assists a bunch of times. He's averaging 9 assists this year, and this is a down year for him. I think that it's going to be great. Again, Alex Sar, Bud, there's a Trey. A bunch of people can benefit from Trae Young on the team. However, he don't play no defense, and that is a lie. He can be a liability. So I don't know, man. We'll see. And lastly, before we go, when they when they traded, when the Grizzlies traded Desmond Bain, I said the icing is the writing was on the wall there. You can't say as a team that you are all in on winning and trade essentially your second or third best player. At that time, your most dependable player, because John Morant and Triple J, Jaren Jackson Jr., consistently dealt with injuries. You hold on. You can't say that you are dedicated to winning when you trade away Desmond Bain and then you fire Taylor Jenkins right before the playoffs. Not right before the season, not right before All-Star, no, you right before the playoffs. What I said the writing was on the wall, I meant was that spells the end of John Morant being there. And while you're probably going to kick it down the road, that probably spells the end of Jaren Jackson Jr. Well, what do you know? Report comes out either yesterday or the day before that essentially John Morant is available for trade. The Grizzlies are accepting trade offers for their star player John Morant. Not only should this not be shocking, especially when you see all the stuff that's been going on between him and the team, and John Morant seemingly not liking the new coach that was appointed by the, like, it just seems like there needs to be a breakup. But I told y'all this as soon as they traded Desmond Bain. I said that there's no way in heaven or hell that you can look your star players in the face and say we're dedicated to winning, but trade their second or third best player and fire the coach before the season. Or no, I'm sorry, before the playoffs. On top of that, everything that's been going on with John Morant, it just felt like it was coming. And I'm not saying that he's going to get traded by this trade, like by the end of the trade deadline, but I will say this. I would be shocked if John Morant is a Memphis Grizzly by the time the season starts next year. Shocked. Again, I'm not saying that he may or may not be traded this trade deadline, but if he is a Memphis Grizzly by the season start or the start of the season next year, I'm blown away. Because again, the writing was on the wall. There's no way that you can say that you're committed to winning, but all of your moves are saying that you're ready for something new. You're ready for a rebuild. You're ready for a regime change. And with that, usually rebuilding teams don't keep their stars because their stars are too good and win too much. So once Desmond Bain was traded, I told you guys, don't be surprised. I will give it 2 to 4 years. John Morant will be gone. That was when Desmond Bain was traded. It's no shocker that they're answering calls for trades. I think John Morant would be great in someone like Miami. Miami's always been looking for a star. I think he'd be great in Miami. I think he'd be great in. I don't know how good he'd be in Memphis. I mean, not Memphis. I don't know how good he'd be in Minnesota. I really don't know. He may be good in Houston. Houston really needs a point guard. But John Morant's more of a John Wall type point guard instead of, well, no, he's more of a, yeah, John Wall type. So we'll see. But I guess this is me saying I told you so. And there you have it. That's been today's episode of the Unpopular Podcast. I truly, truly, truly appreciate you guys. If you want an Unpopular Podcast shirt, hoodie, sweater, long sleeve joggers, the link is in the description below. I have multiple different colors, multiple different designs. Get your Unpopular Podcast merch today. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to get as many subscribers as possible. Tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to subscribe. It definitely means a lot. Same with the DSPs, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you get your DSPs, wherever you want to hear this luscious voice. Please follow, subscribe, comment, rate, share. I'm trying to grow the podcast unilaterally, and I cannot do it without you guys' help. So again, YouTube, DSPs, wherever you get the Unpopular Podcast, please, and you like the content, please make sure to follow, comment, rate, all that. Also, for my socials, that's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I post pretty much daily. That's where you get reels. That's where you get stories. That's probably the quickest way to get to me. If you want to debate, just leave it in the comments. I don't mind going back and forth. Just keep it respectful. It just means that you're listening to me and you have an opinion. Both of things I appreciate and I care about. So again, please follow the socials. I post pretty much daily, and that's the quickest way to get to me. Uh, until next time, much love.